I sense the self-censoring that's just hovering around the fringes of me as I'm talking, because I don't want to offend the Kosi people. I don't want to offend the Dutch. I don't want to offend all this offensive fear.
What it ends up being is, this is what it sounds like. I don't think you're worried about offending any of the people you just mentioned. I think you're worried about offending the audience that's worried about offending other people.
Welcome aboard. You're on Lady Grey. Pull up a seat and listen in to an unscripted, unedited conversation between two authors and artists who are sailing the world. We have been married over 20 years and we still love talking together. With our two boys, we are looking for treasure and sharing what we find through conversations. Good morning to you, Dale.
Good morning, Jonalyn.
What a week. What a wonderful week of learning for us both. This has been our off week for homeschool, and it's been an amazing week for me with my art. And you have had a week off of teaching the boys Bible.
How has it been an amazing week for your art?
Well, I've decided to do an open studio party here on the marina, and I've been sharing invitations and preparing the art. And the art I am going to be showcasing is all about South Africa and the unique culture here, and what makes this place different. And I've been painting, every one of these paintings have been painted with the local water here. The Indian
Ocean?
Yes, the Indian Ocean water. And I've also been studying, just through conversations with locals, what makes this place different, and what are the differences here that people are a little nervous to talk about. That's very interesting to me. So that's what's been a huge week for me, is gearing up for that.
I know you've been painting every day, and I love seeing what you're producing. And if anybody listening would like to see what you're producing as well, you can find a link to Jonalyn's Instagram in the show notes.
Yeah, there's lots there.
Lots of stuff in works in progress.
One of the biggest things I have been learning about is the local black culture, which is called Gosi, or Gosa. I think it's called Gosa. Gosa culture. Anyways, it's a clicking language. As you can tell, Dale and I are not proficient in it.
If you've seen Gonzo's Be Crazy,
than I am.
But I got corrected yesterday by the waiter. I was like, Gosa, and he's like, no. And he did a completely different click for the C sound of Kosa.
So it's not a C, it's the X.
I'm sorry, an X sound.
Yeah, the X is that clicking sound.
Well, I see it written out. I've seen people use a C, but when people aren't clicking, they say Kosa. But you're right. I think it is probably more than. I don't know.
Kosa.
I don't know if we anglicize the alphabet for them or whatever. But it's an old language, and it's the one in the Gonzo's Be Crazy. Which, when I saw that movie, I thought they were just making it up and being silly. And I've heard Robin Williams do comedy routines doing all the clickety click sounds, thinking that he was just making it up and being silly. And turns out it's real. It's right there.
Not only is
we
it
hear
real,
it every day.
but there's a lot of clicking languages. Kosa isn't the only one.
It's not the only one. Well, that's good to know.
And we're probably, here's something that's really important.
Whatever the case is, no matter whatever kind of click I do, it's the wrong click. He said there's like several different kinds of clicks. It's so awesome to know there are sounds with our mouths that can be used to make communicative utterances that we have no clue how to do them. I took classes on the International Phonetic Alphabet, and they would outline all the different sounds. You could write out the phonetic alphabet, and no matter what language it is that you're trying to write out. And there's a sound for everything. So I can write out Russian sounds.
I see.
Kosa is not one of them. These sounds are not in the International Phonetic Alphabet. Completely left out.
That's very revealing. I want to say a couple things. Just disclaimers right off the bat. We're coming at this as philosophers, as very limited husband-wife sailors who happen to be in South Africa for a few months. We might even be saying, obviously, Kosa or Kosi wrong, We might be sharing things about the language that are not accurate because we're still learning about it, but that shouldn't keep us from talking about what we do know. And what I love about life with you on the boat, Dale, is that you are not afraid to notice and to speak out. You're not self-censoring. And it's a powerful thing to have a conversation with you that we're sharing publicly, where you and I are really digging into what makes this culture different, better, and worse than other things we found.
Yeah.
And I sense the self-censoring that's just hovering around the fringes of me as I'm talking, because I don't want to offend the Kosi people. I don't want to offend the Dutch. I don't want to offend all this offensive fear.
What it ends up being is, this is what it sounds like. I don't think you're worried about offending any of the people you just mentioned. I think you're worried about offending the audience that's worried about offending other people.
Oh, that's excellent.
And that's where we are right now in the West. We have, there's something wrong with us. That's what I want to say. And it's funny thing is that we say that, you can't be critical of other cultures, maybe you can only be critical of your own, and even then people don't like it. They're like, well, let me be critical of my own then, if that's the rule. The rule that the problem I see is that we are so soft-footed that it's like we'd rather erase ourselves than understand somebody else. We'd rather get things right before stepping in.
So we never step in.
We never say this to children. We say you need to have courage, you need to have faith, you need to have understanding, you need to have love, you need to go for it, you need to change the world, you need to pursue your dreams. So you become an adult, it's like, don't step in, somebody's going to get hurt. Don't step in, who do you think you are? Don't step in, those dreams aren't worthwhile. Don't step in, you're not good at evaluating things. You can't see things clearly. But we've lost something, and that's a problem. And we have a major, major problem with it in the West. I think there's certain philosophical issues that are in play, like cultural relativism, which are deadly. And I think there's a lot of psychological codependency in play, where we're like, well, I just don't want to, we get really timid and inappropriate. Because when we interact, let's say yesterday we were sitting at the table and 3 languages are being spoken, and we were all laughing about it, maybe a 4th.
Yes, the waiter was teaching us different ways to talk, different like slang to say cool and okay and awesome. And one was British, one was Afrikaans, one was Kosi or Kosa.
Yes.
I'm not sure what the adjective is of that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because we hear people say different things about it, but we know what we're referring to. So it's not like, no, you didn't get the word right, you're offensive, you shouldn't even try. It's like, well, I didn't get the word right, but what words refer to is what we're after.
That's right, they point. Words are pointing.
Words are like
something.
arrows. We're looking at reality. Words help point at something in reality. So I'm after reality, I'm not after words.
That's right.
And that's another distinction people are lost
That's
about.
right. And you never get to practice that if you don't even try. And that's what you were doing at the table.
Yes,
with the
so we were laughing. And so here's an Afrikaans sitting over here. Here's a Kosa man serving us here. And we're, of course, Americans. There's an Englishman over on the other side. And we're laughing, we're enjoying, we're trying, attempting, connecting, all of that kind of stuff. And it was a neat, special time. But nobody was offended, and that's the important part. Nobody's offended that I'm trying to learn, like, hey man, you're all right, in a different language, like a man, leka, always.
Yeah.
Or that other one that we were laughing
cool,
I couldn't even get it right.
And always means awesome, or that's. Yeah, this is
right
what
on.
it means to travel. This is exactly what it means to travel.
But it's so easy to be. Go ahead. No, you're right. You're right.
Well,
I interrupted.
What I want to say is, you make a fantastic point that. Am I really nervous about offending local people who don't even know about our podcast? Well, honestly, I am. I don't want my friend I went on a hike with, who is a local Kosa woman, to say, like, Jonalyn, you got the Kosa word wrong. But she's not going to care. She's going to be just grateful that I took the time to get to know her and understand her, just like she took time to get to know me. And if I heard her talking to her friends about something this Americani woman said, and she was calling me an Americani the whole time, I'd be like, that's funny, it's funny she got it wrong, but it is not offensive to me. My identity in being an American is not so fragile that her calling me an Americani is going to be like, I can't even believe you said my nationality wrong.
No kidding.
How obtuse, how red, whatever, whatever she was.
Because the best part is that she's noticing you and thinking about you. And that
yes, that's
that
what
you matter enough to talk about in a positive or even in a negative way.
That's right. We moved out of critical cultural analysis in a seminar in a college, and we have moved into the world of friendship, where friends try to say the thing, to understand the thing their friend is explaining, even if they say it wrong. They know their friend is not going to pounce on them. Not a good friend. Their friend will say, oh, it's actually pronounced American, not Americani. And they're going to smile about it just so that you know. So some rude person, which is where the public has become, won't make fun of them. That's why you correct and you help your friends, to be able to give them the clarity and the protection from rude people. So if there's any rude people who are already insulted by anything we've said, it's best if you turn this episode off and go find a podcast where people are going to be less offensive to your fragile sense of understanding.
But people who aren't learners, go to people who aren't courageous, go to people who want to live a nerfy life. So
yes, so this is not a nerfy podcast, but please go find one, because there's a lot of those out there.
I mean, it is possible to be offensive, like if you're deliberately trying to, say things the wrong way. But
yes,
but that's a totally different story than people who, are trying. I mean, if I wish I could get everything right all the time, make it perfect, I would love that, because then, my reputation would go up, and I would be like a Superman, and I'd be amazing. But I can't even get my own culture correct, and my own language, first language, correct. So it'd be silly to not even immerse because you're afraid of, quote unquote, offending somebody. Turns out I have not noticed a single person I've offended. I've not found one.
No,
everybody
South Africans
just keeps hanging around and keeps talking.
Not as easy to offend as Americans. That's a huge blessing to me. I enjoy that so much about being here.
Me too.
There are less buttons to get pushed right in the right sequence in South Africa. However, at the same time, while that lends itself to some great conversation, I have noticed that there are some similar problems here in South Africa as in America. And one of the biggest ones I wanted to talk about was it's codependency, but it shows up in romanticizing cultures.
Oh.
Do you mind if I jump into that?
Yeah, you notice that here, or you notice that in general, the way people approach?
I noticed that here and in America.
Okay,
I can't say for every culture. Okay, so let me just back up for a second. Codependency is the dysfunctional behavior or mindset that says, you need me to flourish. Without me, you are nothing. And I need you to need me for my own sense of identity and purpose. And this shows up in America in so many ways.
Oh, our entire political system is built around this these days.
It's in the school system, where you cannot be a functional child unless you're in a school system. That's taken a nice hard knock because of COVID and homeschooling, which is great, but it's still very prevalent. It's in our churches. Without us doing evangelism or good works in social justice in our way, the world will go to hell in a handbasket.
Or without our church organization propping you up every week, you're going to fall apart.
Yes, the idea that you are indispensable, you as a limited creature made by God to play a very finite role, that when you start to think you're indispensable in the life of another human or animal, you can get...
unless they're a child, your own child.
Yes, for a limited time.
Mm-hmm.
This is where codependency creeps in. And it shields itself. Codependency shields itself by many ways. It's really insidious and sneaky in the way it pops up. If you take a moment and talk to a missionary, especially a modern missionary, you can see a lot of work in this area. Good missionaries know how to watch out for codependency, but a lot don't. And I was talking with a local missionary here in South Africa, and I found an attitude that reminded me of the way a lot of left-leaning Christians talk about black culture in America. And it's this romanticizing of culture. And I'm going to share it in South Africa and then see if anybody listening can make the connection with American culture. So I was chatting with this missionary, and she said there is a local story that the Xhosas share. And it is, it reveals the values of the Xhosa culture, which is values of interdependence and mutuality, sharing everything they have. That what is your gain is everyone's gain, not what is your gain is my loss, or what is my gain is your loss. Okay, so this mutuality story goes like this. A teacher comes and is offering a bag of candy in a contest to a group of school-aged children. And he ties the bag of candy to a tree at the bottom of the hill. And he says, all right, the first person to race down the hill and grab that bag of candy gets to keep it. Mm-hmm. They win the bag. So the children all hold hands, and they race down the hill together, holding hands the entire time. And then when they get to the tree, they grab the bag of candy and they share it all together. Mm-hmm. Because and there's a name for it, I cannot recall, but this value of what is one person's gain is everyone's gain is so embedded. There is not that race and rush to compete, and and I can hear my friends who are very critical of the consumer capitalism in America saying, "Oh, isn't that so great?" And I could hear my missionary friend here in South Africa, like she even said, there's so much we have to learn from our native cultures. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I can tell you what I thought, but I'd love to ask you, when you hear that story, what do you think?
Well, my first inclination is to ask myself, are there counterexamples of that even within their own culture? Is everybody running around holding hands? Is that what you see when you're interacting with people? Do you see the guy who's working on his own business, whether it be a cobbler, or the guy who's slaughtering his cows for meat, the butcher? Are they all saying, "Oh, I'm so glad I could slaughter this butcher so that I could distribute all the money that I made from it to everybody around me"? You don't see that. You see people who are, like in every society, no matter what society they have, you see the people who are producers, and you see the people who are, the takers, and I see it. So I look at the hand-holding thing and I go, that's a very interesting romanticized view of it, and it might be around certain things, but it's not around everything. And I think some of that romanticizing, Rousseau, the French philosopher, talked about the noble savage, and he brought that in, that the closer we can get to the state of nature, and he attributed our native cultures to that, the closer we're getting to the purest humans. And it has trickled into all areas of society these days. That's the philosopher that helped birth the French Revolution, is the philosopher heavily influenced in Karl Marx and communism, which is the same idea, that if we can get back to our native self, then all will be pure and perfect in the Garden of Eden again. But I look at it and be like, yeah, that may be true about some things, but it's not true about everything in this culture. So that's a romanticizing, or not telling the truth about everything. And I could even say that about a strongly, evil capitalistic. Whenever we say evil capitalistic, it's because communism has trickled in and made us think negatively about having private property. We can even say the same thing about capitalistic culture, where everybody believes in the same rights. Good people, anyway. Not communists, but everybody believes in the same rights, where you're like, you have freedom of speech, doesn't matter who you are. Like, well, that's a hand-holding experience, running to the prize. Like, everybody has freedom in the press, no matter who you are. Well, it's a hand-holding experience. Everybody has a freedom to defend yourself. Everybody has a freedom to own property and work as a family to make their own way. Everybody, I want to protect your right to do that, whether or not I get to participate. But those are hand-holding activities within that kind of culture. So I have no doubt that what she's saying is true about the candy, whether it's true or not. But I do know that it's easy to find that in every culture, in every society. So it's like, what have we learned here? You're like, well, what is it you're trying to teach me with that illustration? Is one. But two, what I've learned is that communities participate together. But every society does that. So good for them that they figured that out, and good for this missionary that she maybe needed to be reminded of that in her own personal life, that, oh yeah, I do live in community, and yeah, I should participate together, because communities are made up of individuals, but the individual is not more valuable than the community, I take that back. The individual is always more valuable than the community, but the community is made up of individuals, so therefore everybody is equal, and you cannot trample a single person in the name of the community. You have to learn to work together and let every individual be a participant.
Well, I'm glad you caught yourself there, because when you were saying the community is more important than the individual, I'm like, isn't that communism?
No, I would never say that. But I can't say the individual.
No, you did right there, but you corrected yourself.
So sorry.
No, you corrected yourself, so you caught yourself, so I'm really glad. But just so you know, some evil person could take just that little sip and say, see, Dale actually believes in communism. But I know you...
Don't edit this incorrectly. That would not be what we would learn from the native cultures. Don't do it.
Well, it's so important to, in this conversation even, just give each other the chance to restate what we're trying to get at, because this is not rehearsed. You and I are coming at this fresh. So I'm
fresh at 6 o'clock in the morning with the heater going in the background. Everybody can hear the motor.
I know. I hope everyone can hear us. Well, when you said that, it's so helpful, because that's what I thought when she shared this story. I was like, wait a second. That's like Mexican culture. And then, wait, that's what we were told Ohana meant. And Hawaiian culture. And everywhere I have gone and lived, there are values of community where one person's win is everyone's win. We can call it by different names, but it's not unique to Kosi. And what's even more interesting is, this is coming from the missionary. So I actually went on a walk with a Kosa woman, and we spent at least as long together as I did with this missionary. And I shared this story with her, and I said, can you remind me of what this Kosa value is? I can't remember the name. And she said, I've never heard that story. I don't know what value you're talking about.
Oh my. The difference between an outsider looking in and an insider looking out at how others have perceived them.
And here's what I thought immediately. Oh, it's so much easier to just jump up and down with excitement when you find a value in a culture that is maybe looked down upon, which the Kosa culture is looked down upon here in South Africa. I met with a local business owner recently, and he said he would never hire a Kosa. They steal. They all steal. Then there's nothing you can do about it. And every time he lets his guard down, he tries again, he hires one, they steal. And I said, why do they do that, you think? He said, it's part of their culture. The men do this, the women do this, and the men just sit around, and they're hunters and they're fighters, and so there's no battle to fight. They just sit around and they get drunk and then they steal. So just as you're listening to this, Dale, and our audience, how does that make you feel? I'm sharing what this man said. It made me very uncomfortable. Like, don't say that. Don't level a whole culture just because you've had experience with some people stealing. But when you share the story about the candy and the children holding hands, you're like, oh, good. The underdog culture, the native culture has good things to offer. You just feel so relaxed and thankful and like, oh, good, I can just celebrate this about them. But let's just be a little bit more adult here and admit every single culture has things that we can be so impressed by and learn from. Mm-hmm. And has things that are horrible, disgusting, degrading, bewildering, that just bring us so much discouragement and despair about how in the world we can either relate to them or how we can find something good about them. Mm-hmm. And this is true of American culture as well. And just because we are not in that culture does not mean we cannot hold up our God-given yardstick and say, this culture comes short. Just like I come short of where God would have me be as a human.
Yeah. Well, I think when the first question, how do I feel when I hear that? I think, well, how do I reconcile those two views? One view is everybody's a thief, and the other view, everybody's sharing. Is that, what if somebody from Costa culture is stealing from this company to take it back and share it with everybody in their community? Like, there you go, we just reconciled it. But that illustration
that's a great connection.
Would tell me that society, that culture doesn't respect any of the cultures around them.
Or that Costa doesn't actually have a strong view of personal property. That's what that tells me.
Yes, could be, but they're not sharing it with the people they're stealing from.
They might not consider white people who employ them, or I shouldn't just call them white, I should say British or Dutch people, they may not consider them part of their community.
Yes, exactly. That's not very respectful. So, or respecting somebody else's perspectives.
Yes, and then someone would say, well, they're not respecting them because they've been the oppressed and they're the oppressor.
There you go. So that moves us into the second thing
communist
you said.
narrative.
It is, but it's not just that. It is the only people that are allowed to criticize are people I have given permission. It's like, oh, the Kosa are allowed to criticize the Afrikaan, but the Afrikaan are not allowed to criticize the Kosa. I'm like, okay, who made that rule? You're just making up stuff now.
That's such an excellent
And so
point.
but it ends up also being, and we see this in the West now, is that somebody's making up rules of who could criticize whom, and it tends to be the people who are making up the rules are the ones that agree with the people that are not allowed to be criticized.
Yes.
There's an old saying that says,
great.
if you want to know who your rulers are, figure out who you're not allowed to criticize.
If you want to know who your ruler, or who's in charge, or who holds the power, if you want to know who holds the power in America, figure out who you're not allowed to criticize. Well, you're not allowed to criticize LGBTQ+. You're not allowed to criticize black inner city culture. You're not allowed to criticize... You are allowed to criticize white men, but you're not allowed to criticize black females, especially black females running for president. But would you say that black females own the power? I mean, I'd
say you're getting ahead of yourself right now, because that's like making it really complicated.
Okay, sorry. Please continue. I was just trying to adapt.
Well, I was going to say, let me adapt the idea in a simpler way.
Okay.
When I went to Pensacola Christian College, who you were not allowed to criticize was the administration and how idiotic and foolish they were. That's an easy ticket to get yourself kicked out. You can criticize.
I see.
You can criticize everybody else. You can criticize politicians. You can criticize the Presbyterians. But as soon as you start criticizing the independent fundamental Bible-believing Baptist, you're gone.
Especially the ones who made the rules. The administration.
The administration especially.
Yes.
In families.
Yeah.
Who is the one that has all the power is the one you can't criticize. So I've seen that a lot in abusive families. Where it's like, oh, you don't criticize mom. Or, oh, you don't criticize dad. You can't say it like that. And like, oh, we can't all come clean here? Oh, that's really sad. Because as soon as you start criticizing, you start to feel the punishment. You're no longer a favorite child, or you no longer get the same kind of allowance, or the opportunities aren't there, or your parents aren't showing up at your sports activities, or whatever it may be, because, well, you're being critical of it. You know, I've experienced that in my family. Certain people you're critical of, and suddenly all the name calling comes out.
Yes.
Like, you're a this, you're a that, and everything's like a judgment of my character. And we're like, okay, it's that none of the things you're saying are true, but it's your defense mechanism because I touched on the nerve of the problem. And we also see that in our society too, even in politics. We say, if you were to say, you know, especially when you deal with all the identity politics, people who hold identity politics will say, of course you could criticize them, of course you can. Nobody's putting you in prison for criticizing them. They're like, yeah, but you will not be allowed on certain talk shows or in certain
I have a great
spheres
example.
Or even get into certain institutions if you're treating everybody respectfully, but you have a critical view towards a bad idea that they enshrine.
Yes, I have a great example. So, good 10 years plus ago, one of my closest friends and mentors, as a clinical psychologist, spoke up on Facebook saying that marriage actually means a union between a male and a female, a man and a woman. And what gay marriage is trying to promote is not identical with that and causes problems in the original understanding. I mean, a very commonly held view that a lot of people understand. She was censored off of Facebook because of that decade plus ago. And her email was banned, and so every time she tries to sign back in, she's told she can't even get on the platform. So that's a very strong example.
Yep. Very good.
And we found that during the COVID years.
Totally.
If you didn't call it a pandemic, if you didn't believe COVID was actually life-threatening and get the vaccine, you were censored.
That's right. Or talk about people in Hollywood when they're working with their agents, that if they were to support or endorse a certain candidate or even speak up positively about certain political parties, your career's over.
Or if you criticize China.
Or criticize China.
Right now.
There's no
or
backlash.
If you criticize the Quran. These are places you are not allowed to go. And so Americans are really quite adaptable to, okay. They just make a little list and they just avoid those topics. And so we don't actually have conversations about the problems here. Would you call that codependency as well? Or would you call this more just...
It's sold in a codependent way, yes. Because look at the people you're hurting when you talk about it like that. These people have been hurting for so long and you're just making it worse. You're insensitive. And the codependency says...
They need you to not speak about them negatively. That's how it's sold. They need you.
Yes, you need to get on board and be included. These people need you. And the people who need to be needed are like, oh yeah, good. Because my principles, if I even have any, don't matter. The truth doesn't matter. But the way I feel when I'm censoring myself, knowing, and it's been sold to me, that I'm helping somebody. They call it the prejudice of low expectations, where people don't realize that they're being racist by saying, this certain ethnic group just can't keep up, so we need to give them special permission to get, and special privileges to get into school, special privileges to get a job, to get extra, bonuses from the government in order to, get ahead, or whatever it may be. It's the prejudice and the racism of low expectations.
It's terrible.
They're not smart enough. Do you know how bad you sound? You sound horrendous. They're not a human being. Wow. So, but that's everywhere.
It is everywhere. I was having a conversation with a friend who's a very powerful position in Amazon, and she was saying how difficult it is to find a black person to be in their top ranks, like in their administration area. And she said, everyone we hire, they're like, I just feel like you're hiring me because I'm black. I'm like, I told my friend, that's exactly what you're doing. I still carry from 20 plus years ago the feeling of curiosity and maybe anxiety. Yeah, anxiety is a better word. That UVA accepted me, not just because I had the grades, I made the cut, but because I am half Mexican. And they needed to fill that quota up there in rural Virginia. And I wonder, did I get in on my own merits, or did I get in because the color of my skin? And that bothers me an awful lot. It bothers me at Talbot. When I went to school there, I got a scholarship, but I was one of 3 females. Did I get the scholarship because of my gender, or did I get it because I was smart enough? Would they have chosen me if I had been a white male? I literally don't know. But the prejudice of low expectations, or filling a quota, which is what it ends up becoming with policy, ends up in... It leaves a mark of doubt over my suitability or my acceptability or my ability to get in on my own steam.
Yeah. No, I know. That's horrible for somebody that's receiving on it. And if you feel a fish out of water. And we see where it's happening when people just aren't as good as they need to be at what they do. But you have to just accept it because
there's a lot of people,
their skin or their gender or whatever other category we've invented.
There are a lot of people in jobs right now in America that shouldn't be there because they're not good enough at them. And it's not because of their skin color. It's not because of their gender. It's because someone had the arrogance to think, anyone can fill this job and we need someone with this socio-demographic or gender identity. So we're gonna slap you in. That creates its own mental health crisis if you don't have a rock solid understanding before God of your value.
Yeah. And you're talking about it on the receiving end.
Yes.
And I keep analyzing it from from the other side of it.
Well, both are important.
It's just absolutely horrendous.
Well, since
whoever has created these rules obviously are not creating them in terms of reality.
they're often doing it out of codependency to make themselves feel better.
These DEI programs and human resources, and people who are listening to this who are in those areas,
Yes.
that there are arbitrary rules, codependent rules, that are in the way of actually accomplishing the goal that the position or your very job exists for. If my job was to shovel dirt and carry it from this spot to the other in a wheelbarrow, I wouldn't hire somebody who can't shovel.
That's right.
But that's what DEI does. Like, oh, you can't shovel, that's okay. I'm looking around, I'm seeing all these really strong people shuffling. We got to definitely hire a skinny guy, you guys. He's got to be really weak. Probably doesn't even get enough protein. We need to get somebody that's sickly to do all the shoveling because our DEI program said this is what diversity looks like. And you're like, is the goal to shovel, get the stuff moved, or is the goal to appear a certain way? And that's what we're up against. But this all comes from the idea, a much deeper idea, and that we're criticizing, and it's funny because we talk about being so, and not having the courage to criticize other cultures.
Yes.
And the issue is, some of that comes from, well, if you don't know enough about a culture, you probably shouldn't criticize it. And that's true in general. I think it's important to get to know somebody before you talk about what all their, character flaws are. Like, oh, I saw that guy, and he looked at me a little bit funny, therefore I know he's embezzling money from his company. You're like, well, you should probably get to know him a little bit more and realize that he actually he had a bug hit him in the eye, and so he's looking at everybody funny today.
He has
it's
a
because of
stink eye
bugs,
for
not because
everybody.
of a character. So it's important to have
Yes.
knowledge. And knowledge,
I agree.
we don't live in a knowledge tradition society anymore in the West. Sadly, the average person. But we have to have knowledge, which is a justified belief, a justified true belief that something happens to be true. So once you have knowledge, then you can be critical. Like, oh, I have knowledge of this house, therefore, that's why you bring in an expert. Like, this roof looks like it's not, doesn't have good character, and it's going to cave in, so we need to buttress it up in these different ways and reinforce it. Great. Knowledge led to the criticism, led to the solution. And we could do the same thing with cultures and with characters and with each other all the time.
That's right.
So in philosophy, we call, analyzing, we call it a descriptive. When you enter into something, and so you might, walk into a room and you see a bed, and you see all the covers and the sheets and the pillows on the bed, and the description would be describing what does that bed look like. That's one side of it. Great. Description is very important in order for us to start acquiring knowledge. But then there's another side of it that we call prescription. It's the prescriptive, which asks the question, not what does that bed look like, but what should that bed look like. And the shoulds are what everybody's afraid of in Western society, because we have become relativists in our aesthetics and in our morality.
That's right.
So should gets thrown away in the name of another should that everybody assumes and believes, but they don't realize it's a should, in the name of everybody should be getting along. Everybody should mind their own business. Everybody should just go with whatever the trend is. Everybody should accept what I say you should accept.
Because not everything
No,
is
you can accept a
acceptable.
blue hat, but you can't accept a red hat. So the shoulds are everywhere, but we're not shoulding with knowledge. We're shoulding for power. We're shoulding for manipulation. We're not shoulding with knowledge. And prescription says we get the knowledge, and then we can prescribe. Oh, that bed is made well, or that bed is made within the parameters of a made-up bed. This bed I'm looking at looks like a teenager slept in it and they didn't wake up till 11 a.m. because they were out with their friends sneaking off doing who knows what last night. I could tell by how the bed is not made. And those are all prescriptions about this is somebody that has living more of a disordered life if I have knowledge of how this bed is made every single day, or somebody who doesn't care about having a made bed. It might not be a character issue. It might just be they have different priorities. Whatever the case may be, I can look at the description, gain knowledge, and then prescribe where are we really at? What is the analysis? How should this bed be made based on the kind of person that I'm working with here? And so there are times when the little children holding hands running down the hill, trying to, saying if we all get to share the candy, we may be able to look at that and say, okay, let's find that actual situation, not just the cute illustration that came out of a children's book, but let's look at that situation where it's happening in real time and ask ourselves, should it be this way? And when we look at that, and then we're like, well, how do you judge what should be? Well, you got to stop being a relativist and start looking at the objective realities of what goodness is, what knowledge is, what love is. Not the codependent stuff that twists and pollutes all these things. But look at what they really mean. And then you might find out, oh, only half those kids were holding hands going down there. And they were all the kids who were, working together. But the other half were the ones who were always sapping off of the first half, who needed to learn to cooperate, who needed to learn to figure out how to get things for themselves so that they can be active participants in the community and not always just merely takers or bottom feeders or whatever it may be. If we can prescribe, look at things from a prescriptive way, we can better analyze where these things stand and where they ought to go. I guarantee you, even in the most tribal of cultures, they have elders in their groups and parents in their groups who say, you can't do it like this. You need to do it like that.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, look at that. They're being critical within their own thing. So there's no such thing as the noble savage. Everybody can go wrong. And so we're trying to figure out, where we can go wrong, where we can go right. Just because somebody travels 100 miles or travels 2,000 miles or travels 6,000 miles doesn't mean they stop being human. If you travel from France for the very first time and arrive in Japan, a lot of things are going to be different. But if you acquire knowledge of what's going on in Japan, it sometimes holds up a mirror to yourself, because you're like, oh, I didn't even think about some of these things in my own culture. So it helps me be a little bit more prescriptive of my own culture. Be like, there's something here that we need to evaluate. But also at the same time, there's some things here that are missing that my society has, and my society has discovered as a moral good. Mm-hmm. And so therefore that needs to be brought in if this society wants to be better. And that kind of mutual exchange of prescription is the best way to live and the best way for human beings to, in the old Christian sense, to step out of the blind spots of their sin or their own dysfunction or their own self-pollution or their own trampling one another and move onto a higher plane of what goodness, love, and virtue mean.
Yeah.
But you can only do that through prescription. And
yes, that's exactly right.
If you're only describing, you don't ever arrive at virtue.
That's right. You have to get better at prescribing, and we already do it. It's just a matter of if we do it well or we do it according to truth and goodness, or if we do it according to just what the culture tells us is true and good. I think it would be fantastic to move into some prescriptions of what we have found here in South Africa. I think that would be interesting to chat about in the remaining time we have left, if you're up for that. Yeah,
I'm going to come up with illustrations. Go for it.
Well, I was thinking we could even start with that candy example. It's very easy to say children should share of their luxuries. If all the bellies are filled, and then everyone is given let's say everyone's eaten, and then there's a big watermelon on the table. It's very easy to say in any culture that the child who grabs the watermelon runs off and then eats it all for himself is being greedy and self-absorbed. But if you change the scenario and everyone is hungry, it's worse. Mm-hmm. So the candy example to me stands out as the candy is a kind of a luxury. You don't survive off of just candy, at least you shouldn't. So it's very easy to require children to share when they're not sharing something that they need for their survival. It's an above and beyond. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a value in every society.
Not just not needed for their survival that day, but it's not needed for their survival ever. Candy is a superfluous pleasure, really.
Yes, exactly.
In fact, more than just a little bit of candy is actually very bad for you and doesn't make you feel well at all. So it's a very interesting part of that illustration.
It is. So if I'm going to contrast South Africa to the United States, something that I've noticed here is because of apartheid, there still is division of where people live. There's the Xhosa village, which we have visited. And then there's the, they call the group of people who have some white or Dutch or English in their blood and some local Africa in their blood. And you can tell their skin is lighter. They look like most African Americans, actually. They call them coloreds, and that is not offensive. That is the normal
one of the categories.
Mm-hmm. It was originally used by the government, and I don't know where it was used before that, but everyone uses it here. The colored people we meet here use it for themselves. So that I'm going to use that term, even though you might, when I first heard it, I'm like, don't say that about yourself. That's offensive. I'm like, wait a minute, that's American culture. That's American culture. I'm importing that here. And then I asked I asked myself the question: is the word colored essentially an aggressively racist term? Is it dehumanizing? No, it's not in its essence. It depends on how the word is used. And here in South Africa, it is not. In fact, there was a server who said to me, I know in America saying we are colored is very offensive, but here it is not. And I was like, okay, I'm going to get over that
You made a very important prescriptive distinction right there, where you're like, is your intention to actually dehumanize somebody? To make somebody below you, to make somebody worse, to make somebody not human, and not worthy of love, the way you're worthy of love. That is where the problem comes in. That's exactly right. But that's a prescription.
That's right.
And that's such an important way to say, when you use the word colored in South Africa, you're pointing to a reality over here that we're trying to get at. The word is irrelevant, but since it's a word everybody uses to refer to this community over here on this side of town, therefore, that's where we get at. So I would like you to get to the point and not worry about the word. Okay.
Well, I just want to say one thing. Yes. I think the reason the word colored is so offensive in the United States is that was the word that was literally painted above the bathrooms. For sure. And so it's associated.
It was dehumanizing.
It was dehumanizing in the United States. But, okay. So, what was my point? I'm trying to go back to sharing
Maybe
candy.
You just meant to. Yeah.
No, I had something very specific I wanted to share about the different cultures and prescriptive and compare. Yes. In the United States, we do see like an intentional integration happening over the years. I went to a high school where they literally bussed in Mexicans from inner city Los Angeles to my high school. And I spent a lunch in the cafeteria where they were all eating their prepaid lunches, and spoke with them and hung out with them and practiced my Spanish. I didn't look Mexican, but I felt very comfortable there because I was raised by a Mexican grandma in part. And so being in that cafeteria was not uncomfortable or like foreign to me. None of my other white friends would have ever done anything like that. But I did. And what I'm trying to say is when I came here to South Africa and I see these different groups, the Xhosa culture up on the hill is almost all darker skinned people with their own culture of Xhosa. And there's a lot of immigrants who, when they come to this town, they move to the Xhosa village because it is one of the most, I don't want to say welcoming, but they don't stand out. Like a Nigerian or Zimbabwean doesn't stand out there. If you're coming from Zimbabwe,
you're not colored.
That's
you're
right.
You're not Afrikaan, and you're not English.
And I should say Afrikaan is the word used to describe the Dutch people who moved here hundreds of years.
Because it sounds like African, and you would think that the Xhosa people would be called the Afrikaan.
I know.
Because it sounds like that's true Africa, but it's not. It's the Dutch.
Yes. Okay, so
I'm
my
just saying
point...
That's why they would go to a village like Xhosa Village, because that's...
It's local. It's the local
It's the
black
logical
culture.
Conclusion, yeah.
Yes. So what I want to point out is when you live around people who are similar to you, and even up there in the Xhosa village, the Zimbabweans stay in their own little enclave. We might even use the word derogatory term ghetto up there. And if there is violence, it's often against the immigrants. The Xhosa men will gang up against the Zimbabweans and there'll be a knife stabbing. This reminds me of what we're not even allowed to talk about, but which does happen in the United States, which is black on black violence. Is when you feel like you're at the bottom of the totem pole, and I know you're not even supposed to say totem pole, but I don't care. I'm just going to say I'm just going to say it. When you feel like you're at the bottom of the totem pole, you are scrapping and scratching to get up. You feel like scarcity is a bigger issue. And so there's more infighting. You see it in family cultures.
Where they're not sharing the
parents, they're not sharing the candy. when parents are really aggressively fighting and mean and disagreeing, and the children also are fighting over the scraps of the parents' attention and care because there's less to go around. The parents are distracted by fighting with each other. And it's the same in culture. If there's not as much money there, there's more bickering, there's not enough jobs. So we're going to knife the Zimbabweans who are coming, who are working harder and taking our jobs in gardening. That's another thing, is there's an assumption. Zimbabweans are really good gardeners. Nigerians are really good at this. And we have the same stuff in the United States.
What I know is
Mexicans
that they're not
work
holding
cleaning
hands.
houses and as nannies. But what I'm trying to say is, in South Africa, because apartheid which apartheid just means division, and like the different groups
Segregation.
have to live amongst their groups. So the colored village was set up for colored people to live there. And there are certain jobs you could have and not have. The remnants of that culture is still here. And part of the reason the food is so incredible and the service is so amazing is because no one has told the coloreds and the Xhosa and the black culture, you have been oppressed so many years. You need to rise up and destroy and kill the white or the African people. Oh, wait a second. Yes, that has come here. It totally has come
in the
here.
north, yeah.
And that's why Johannesburg is so dangerous.
Yeah, they're killing farmers. We have a friend that we've made here that has lost 4 family members now to murder because of these political factions being told that the white farmer is your enemy.
But what I'm trying to say is the people here in Nisa along the coast have not bought that, have not agreed with that. And there could be so many reasons for that. It could be they're just too afraid, or they are grateful for the little bit of jobs that they can have, or with the little bit that they can make. But I know every American who's come here, including myself, when they see the way the Xhosa people live, they're like, such poverty. They're only making this much a day. This is outrageous. This is a humanitarian crisis and issue, and this is wrong. We come in with our American views. This is wrong. Prescribing that the way there's division of labor or there's division of living situations and socioeconomical levels, this is wrong. Because in America, we have been programmed to think if an African American is living in a house with a mattress on the floor, and we have 3 cars and we live in a big house with a nice room en suite with our bedroom and bathroom, that inequity is wrong. And as a woman who is very concerned about flourishing, I come here and I spent time in the township looking at how the Xhosa lived. It reminded me a lot of the way my grandma lived in Mexico. And of course they would like to have an actual bathroom with running water. Of course that would be better and more enjoyable for them. But I don't know that I can say inequity. I don't think I can say inequity itself is wrong.
And equity and inequity, our Marxist terms, have to do with the same outcome. So unless everybody has the same house and everybody has the same money flow, therefore somebody is wrong and something is bad. And so that's the prescription based on a completely different set of anti-realist principles of knowledge and morality. And that's what you're dealing with. So the immediate response is, oh my goodness, look at the poor. Something's wrong here. It's so wrong. How can none of you see it? Like, everybody sees it. But everybody around you has knowledge of what's actually going on. And until you have that knowledge, oh, Mr. Outsider, Mrs. Outsider, you don't know what's going on. And that's why you cannot prescribe or assume things are a certain way until you step into the culture that we're in.
Yes, that's why when people come here, we're meeting fellow boat builders from America who are like, this is just terrible. Look at where they live. And I want to say, have you gone to the township yet? Have you looked and seen the way these people actually live? Because you're judging that they are so inferior and they have to be unhappy with your American, slightly Marxist classes.
And they probably need your help.
Yes.
And the codependency starts to come in. Yeah.
They assume that. What can we do to help them?
Yeah.
And it just brings me back to what it was like for me.
We don't have a lot of time left, and I wanted to get to more of the question that you asked.
Okay. Okay.
And you said, what have you,
Can I just say one sentence?
Yes, please go ahead.
Growing up, being raised by a grandmother from Mexico who lived in impoverished conditions with a dirt floor, not having enough food, I know that there are other things to be learned from life than having the physical good gifts around us. And I know what it's like to not know where your next meal is going to come from. I know what it's like to live in areas where you feel impoverished. And that did not impoverish my soul. That enriched who I am today. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it affects the way I paint and the way I see. And I would not exchange that for all the wealth of my father who didn't share it with me. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's all I want to say.
No, you're right. And wealth is an illusion, because some people see wealth as only financial.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Their question was, what things have we seen, examples we've seen in this society that are like positive benefits I think we could take home, or what are we seeing here, an example.
That would be great.
One thing that has stood out to me is how, at least in the areas that we have been, is how readily and unabashedly and unthinkingly people break the law. And talking to the Afrikaans, who seem to be the more candid group here, about looking at and explaining what's going on around us. They joke about it and laugh about it. Like, man, this is South Africa, man. This is South Africa. This is the way we do things here. And like, they're not worried about the law. And the way it is, no, man, this is South Africa. They don't worry about that. And that honestly has been refreshing to me. And because even though I believe that rule of law is better than rule by fiat, or rule by the king has made a declaration on a whim, again, an anti-realist, non-moral type of statement, like, now everybody's going to bring all the chickens to the palace. Or like, that's not right. But even though I believe in rule by law, I believe in rule by just laws. And that any law that is not just, not following the rules of morality, not just arbitrary, but not following the rules of morality and reason, are unjust laws. They should be ignored. Yeah. And that's what people do.
They do that here in South Africa.
So I just took a picture and shared it on Instagram stories, a few days ago, Sailing Lady Grey, of the sign that says, no fishing, this is a national park. And right behind the sign are all these people with their lines out fishing right there on the rocks. And I like that picture. I thought, this is fantastic, because there's no reason for them not to be fishing out there. They could be fishing not 10 feet, but 100 feet down the beach. They could fish there. The fish are the same fish. It's like, but no fishing here, right here in this spot. And people are like, forget that. Your rule is silly. It doesn't follow reason. Nobody's in the way. Nobody's getting hurt. It's not like there's this one little spot where there's this fish population we're trying to preserve, because the fish are coming and going with the tide. In about 25 minutes, the fish are going to be over there outside your little no fishing zone. All of that is silly. And the only reason
it's a national park is because some famous boat sank right there, and so they want people to be able to dive. I think. I mean,
no, it's not. It's not even it. It's not even it.
So it's just like arbitrarily, this is a national park right here because it's a pretty spot.
and they're probably they have to deem it so they can have public trails and have federal money, maintaining certain parts of it, keep open spaces, less development, because all those things that come with it.
Breaking rules of conservation is pretty much one of the 10 Commandments in the United States.
It totally
you cannot break those, and you're evil
and
if you
we redefine what conservation means.
It's so true.
Fishing is not anti-conservation. In fact, the original conservation movement was created by hunters and fishermen trying to preserve, nature.
That's so important. That's important to remember that. I forgot that.
It wasn't created by what we call environmentalists now, and I won't even get into why the word environmentalist is such a bad prescriptive word of what's going on.
If you're interested in that, guys, ask us. We'll do another episode on that.
But anyway, I love that idea that there is a carefreeness about following. Really, you should be a good person. You should be a reasonable person. But all the laws that don't fit that, people are like, it's African, man. It's Africa. This is the way we do things in Africa. I'm like, it's so refreshing. Even people walk on the street. Like, if there's no cars on the street, walk wherever you want to on the street. That's what everybody does. And at first I was like, why aren't they walking at the crosswalk? Why aren't they waiting for the little green man? Like, they don't have little green men, on half the crosswalk, most of it. It's just a green light or a red light for cars. You just walk whenever it's safe. Reason says walk when it's safe, but rule of law is oh, we only walk when the little guy's there, and there's a policeman over there with a whistle and a ticket, and he's going to charge you and fine you and do this, this, and this, and this. And when I first came here and saw how people cross the street, I thought, this is nuts. Somebody's going to get hurt. And I think on the highways, I still believe that, because reason says you should not cross the street when somebody's driving 70 miles an hour at you. But in the towns, I love the carefreeness of like, well, there's no cars, I'm just going to cross the street, la, 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 la. I'm like, there we go. Maybe that's the way we ought to be doing things, you know. So those are simple examples to me where I think it's reflected probably in a wide range of areas. If we were to, you know, spend several years here and really get to understand it, that that people are more relaxed around the rules of government and more in tuned to the rules of, you know, reason and relationship, and, you know, and treating one another fairly and cross when it's safe. And I feel like that connects people more to reality rather than the fantasy. Because a little green man, a little red hand at the crosswalk, that's a fantasy. That's just giving you some rules. But the reality is the coast clear? Are there cars coming? That's the reality. And I think that that's a wonderful value that the West needs to remember, because the West was built on reality. On a realist view of the world. That's and excellent. I think that and I follow the 10th Amendment Center, which I really love if anybody's interested in following that. And they talk about the nullification movement in America. And that's what the Founding Fathers believed in, nullification, that if any law did not follow reason and conscience, then it should be ignored. And nullification is ignoring laws and making them irrelevant. You don't need to have a whole bunch of people pass another law to get rid of it. Just ignore it, because you are a citizen. And citizens have greater sovereignty than the whole government itself.
Oh, that's such an empowering, important
It's hugely important, because that's humanizing, and we have lost our way. So that's something that has been refreshing in South Africa that I take home with me.
And
I'm not going to run around crossing the street the wrong way, because I don't want the guy to blow the whistle at me. But I think that trying to inhabit and live in that kind of mindset is an important mindset for free people. Yeah. So go ahead.
Well, I wanted to say we're still newbies here. We're still learning a lot about the culture, but we wanted to share some of our insights at the very beginning of our journey. Maybe we can do another one of these when we're ready to set sail in a few months.
Yeah.
Lady Grey life is what we do together, but we also do things separately. Dale teaches families how to read the Bible and share it with their children. You can find in the show notes his stories of Jesus for the modern family. You will get all the study questions with this monthly subscription. Wonderful way to rebuild an actual biblical literacy built on storytelling. I own a fine art business, and my goal is to look carefully at every person I paint for, find their uniqueness, especially the uniqueness that they are afraid of, so that they can remember who they are. If you're interested in a painting that reminds you of who God has made you to be, please reach out. I would be so happy to work with you to paint you and your life. We also have classes that we have built to help you become a more spiritually healthy Christian. Those are at Thinkific. Links to all of these are in the show notes. And if you'd like to share a question or feedback, you can email us directly at hello@dalefincher.com. We'll catch you next time on Lady Grey.